Such a beautiful day in the neighborhood, but I can't tell you about that because of copyright. So I'll just hum.
Are you gonna do that every time you come in the room? What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Tavern Talk by Initial Reaction. I'm Philip, and joining me once again this week, Mr. Levi Agee.
Hello, neighbor.
Hey, welcome to the
neighborhood.
well, I was gonna say welcome to the Three Timers Club,
yeah.
But yours was way better.
Oh, wow.
Thank you for being here, neighbor.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing your feelings with me today.
Well, I'm gonna try my best, and I hope those feelings are reciprocated by you. And I feel like instead of talking as much as I usually do, I should just be quiet, and sit here and listen.
Well, actually, let's just hold a moment of silence for a minute. Just think about all the movies we love. Was that a minute?
I think so.
Okay, good.
If you haven't guessed by now, we're talking about Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. It is the movie that has been positioned as being about Mr. Rogers, but it's not.
I would say
It's not.
There's a little bait and switch there.
A little bit,
but
yeah.
I will say it didn't bother me that much.
No, not at all. I liked the approach. I appreciated the approach. It's not your standard like cradle to grave biopic, but it's also not. It's kind of the like little excerpt out of someone's life, but it's not like the necessarily the most interesting excerpt out of his life.
Right.
But
it's definitely much about the writer, the journalist, and sort of his relationship to what he learned from Mr. Rogers, which to me was a good springboard for sort of the sort of humanistic approach to what Mr. Rogers stands for.
Yeah. If you're not familiar with the article that this is based on, we're talking about A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood once again. It's directed by Marielle Heller. She directed Can You Ever Forgive Me last year with Melissa McCarthy. But this is, in the film, his name is Lloyd Vogel. He is an investigative reporter at Esquire, played by Matthew Rhys, and he's kind of in a rut. I mean, he's been married to his wife for 8 years. They've just had a baby boy, and he's kind of using work as an escape to like get away from what he's afraid of, essentially.
Has a very kind of troubling relationship with his father.
Yeah, his father is played by Chris Cooper. Yeah, and so he internalizes a lot, and then he is given this assignment, somewhat knowingly by his editor, to profile Mr. Rogers for an issue about heroes. And I think she kind of knows that this could be as beneficial for him as it is for the magazine, and so
they kind of set his character up as sort of a kind of problematic writer, in that people don't necessarily want to be interviewed by him. And the setup was that Mr. Rogers was sort of the only one that really wanted to be interviewed by him, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, and what I kind of thought was interesting, we were talking about the approach, was I find one of, and I'm guilty of this as well, like I always wondered how genuine or how real was the Mr. Rogers character facade that he had in his show. Was that really him? Was it just a character? Like how was he in real life, and how representative was that TV persona of him in real life? And
I've done a lot of research on him, and I've yet to find a expose, if you will, and I think this film kind of shows that someone really trying to get at that, of like, what makes you angry? What I want to see a ticked off Mr. Rogers, and almost like asking, does the Dalai Lama curse or something like that, and so there's this real interesting dichotomy of. And even his wife in the film talks about his sainthood, and I used to refer to him as like, Mr. Rogers is my version of a saint, and they don't really like that approach, because they really want you to see that he is a real flawed human being. He just works really hard at being Mr. Rogers.
That's exactly what I was going to get at, because they have this approach of this guy who is trying to find something wrong with it, to disprove that he's not as good as people believe him to be, that there has to be this flaw in there. And exactly, specifically the scene with Lloyd and Mr. Rogers' wife, where she's like, I don't like when people call him a saint, because that's an unattainable goal, and he works really hard to be this light in other people's lives. And then Lloyd goes on to kind of run with that and say, like, well, how heavy is this burden that you bear of dealing with other people's, or helping other people deal with their problems?
Yeah.
And it's just, I mean, I don't even know if we've mentioned yet that Tom Hanks plays Fred Rogers.
Kind of the big thing there.
Yeah.
So, you know, when I heard the news of that, it was right after the documentary that came out.
Yeah.
Was that earlier this year or last year?
It was last summer.
Within a year and a half or so. And all these people were sharing with me, you know, that Tom Hanks is going to play, and what my thoughts were. You know, at first I was kind of like, you know, I wish they would have gotten someone that was less well known, because Tom Hanks is one of the A-list stars. He's so known for, you know, his character's Forrest Gump and sort of the things he did in the 90s, and kind of being that guy, the nicest man in Hollywood. And so
it's hard to separate Tom Hanks from characters,
but
sometimes.
Also kind of feels like a stereotype, and a little bit of like, we took the nicest guy in Hollywood and we made him play the nicest guy in television.
And he's played a lot of real life people too. Like he's been Walt Disney, he's been Sully, he's been, you know, the astronaut in Apollo 13. Like there's a ton of real life. The Captain Phillips, you know, he's played a ton of real life people. So it's like, oh, that seems like an easy choice.
Safe bet.
Yeah,
very safe bet.
And again, he is. There's that comparison of his persona in real life with Fred Rogers.
Did you have a disconnect in the film of kind of seeing Rogers and then seeing Hanks, and then because they kind of,
I think maybe
at first a little bit I did, and then it kind of, you fall out of that kind of comparison thing, and then every now and then it pops back in. But ultimately, I think he did a pretty dang good job.
Well, I was gonna say, I think the fact that his reputation is so similar to Mr. Rogers in a lot of regards, just of them being pleasant human beings who are just kind and, you know, generally kind-hearted people. I think that kind of lended itself well to it, but also because of the way the movie uses Mr. Rogers, I think that he's not in the forefront, you know, every single frame. I think that helped a lot too.
I mean, I
too sidetracked.
I have my kind of fantasy casting of who Mr. Rogers could have been, but you know, if it were, hold on, but if it were, say, like Gary Busey,
I can go to your mama's and start a small fire in her panties.
You know, who is the #1 pick? No, but I'm saying if it were a different character actor or something like that, in the wrong hands, you could bring a lot of baggage to that role. And sort of a wide mainstream audience may be very uncomfortable with, maybe they picked the best actor that could deliver it, but the sort of charisma and the presence that Tom Hanks brings, that's got to be in their casting choice.
Yeah, and to that point, it's like, it's still Tom Hanks. He's such a good actor, and he does disappear enough into the role that it's because he's essentially playing a supporting part.
Yeah.
And kind of getting back around to the original point was the fact that, he's...
the Tom Hanks kind of like pulling back and sort of being a supporting character in the movie, it kind of helps you invest into the main character story a little bit more.
Right.
That sort of the Matthew Rhys character, you get a little bit more invested in him, whereas if it were Tom Hanks at the forefront of this movie, it'd be hard to kind of care about the other characters.
Exactly.
The other thing about the movie that I really quite enjoyed was the surrealness of it. There were a lot of scenes that framed that were really surprising to me, and they kind of had a Michel Gondry almost vibe to it, where there was a lot of things happening that you're just like, interesting that they took that route, but I think it played nicely with kind of that public television. You know, as a representative of public television myself now, I think that storytelling technique and the way that they use the sets and stuff from Mr. Rogers, but also they kind of included some of the characters in that fantasy and that neighborhood world, right, I thought was a really, really smart way of doing that.
Yeah, and it helped with kind of getting in the headspace of the writer character of Lloyd, who is just, like I said, is internalizing all this family drama and just conflict about how he should deal with his dad, who has a lot of health issues, but he hasn't reconciled everything that happened between him and his mother and his father, and the way it uses the Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood set and the characters, the puppets within that to kind of help him.
There's everything from the show, all those touch points come into the narrative in a really seamless blended way.
Yeah, it was. I mean, there were parts of it that were like it wouldn't have been a traditional approach as far as like a biopic goes, but the kind of quirkiness and weird choices are just weird enough to make you kind of sit up and be like, oh, this is This is an interesting approach, while not being off-putting.
Yeah,
at all.
there's a lot of plays on your nostalgia and kind of your memory and senses and stuff, and sort of like almost put you back kind of as a kid. And they have archival footage and things like that, or Tom Hanks' version of those events that were very interesting.
That stuff is pretty great. And beyond all of that, it reinforces the messages of Mr. Rogers of being just kind, and of being patient with children, and
insanely wholesome.
Yes.
And just the message of everybody, you're fine the way you are, you're not broken.
Right.
And I think that's something that a lot of audiences will respond to. And I wish I had a little counter at the bottom of the screen for how many times I cried during the movie, because I was just a mess. This is one of those films that I think if you're just even slightly aware of Mr. Rogers, it's going to really do a lot for you. But if you've just never really been into that zeitgeist or know kind of his backstory, like I'm thinking of a lot of younger viewers that didn't really grow up with him, can respond to it as well.
Yeah, well, we have younger-ish daughters. Yeah. And I don't know if yours
Daniel
is
Tiger's
Neighborhood, that will continue the legacy, and it's just nice to see that continue. But saying all that, how it hit you, how it affected you, as you know, on Tavern Talk we do out of 5 stars. So initial reaction, we just came out of A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. What would you rate it?
I'm gonna give it 5 trolleys. 5 trolleys, ding dings.
Yeah.
I can't recommend it enough. As we were watching it, I was thinking of my wife foremost, who I was going to text and say, you have to watch this immediately. I want to cry with you through this whole movie. But then everybody that I work with, at public television.
I didn't even mention that.
I just started AETN, sort of Arkansas's PBS. And so, this movie has a lot of meaning for me, and a lot of the work that we're trying to do is very special. And so, wanting to see people why public television is so important. I think that this movie does a really great job.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that and for being here. I'm going to go a solid 4. I really enjoyed it. It warms the heart. It's a perfect, like, if you have family coming in, or you're going to see family next week for Thanksgiving and you all want to go see a movie together, I can't imagine a better movie than A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood to go and see, and just to reinforce this need for just love.
Family connection.
What is that quote he has about everything comes from love or the lack of it.
Love or the lack of it.
It's so good. Wow. And it's just it just reinforces all those things that Mr. Rogers stood for, but at the same time kind of brings a new side to him that if you saw the documentary, those were all people who knew him very well and who could speak to him on a day-to-day basis. And this is a different perspective. It's a nice little companion piece with that.
This shows kind of a main character who's very cynical of what Mr. Rogers stands for, and I think showing that kind of point of view is something we haven't seen.
Absolutely, yeah. And so very good, very touching. I only say 4 because I don't think it necessarily excels into like exceptional territory for me. But it's so very good and so very worth seeking out. So definitely do that for A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. I think regardless of star ratings or scores or whatever, we would both recommend it highly. So thank you for watching. Thank you for checking out Tavern Talk by Initial Reaction. If you liked this review, be sure to hit subscribe below, hit the notification button. We have a new review from the Movie Tavern every week, so definitely do that so you'll be notified when we upload the latest one. Other than that, thank you again for watching. Thank you again, Levi, for being here. I appreciate it, man.
It was
Thank you
wonderful.
so much.
Wonderful
You're
trip.
So dapper, too.
And
I love that outfit.
It's all about comfort.
All right, well, thank you once again. Thank you as well. We'll see you next week.